Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I want to chat about introducing and exposing younger readers to Jane Austen. What is the best age to start reading Austen's work? Is there such a thing as too young for Jane Austen? I read my first Jane Austen book when I was 12 or 13 on a beach vacation. It was Pride and Prejudice, and I fell in love with the story and the characters and the marriage plot and the romance of it all. Prior to reading Pride and Prejudice, I had no concept of the plot. I rather miraculously went in with no spoilers whatsoever. All I knew was that Jane Austen was a famous author from a long time ago who wrote love stories, and her most famous work was Pride and Prejudice. Since then, I've read Pride and Prejudice at least 4 or 5 more times, probably more to be honest, and I have very different views on the novel and on Jane Austen. I've learned more about Regency society and the marriage plot, and view Jane Austen's work more as social commentary rather than love stories. But I still love Pride and Prejudice just as much as I did the first time I read it, if not even more. And then, of course, after I read Pride and Prejudice for the first time, I dove headfirst into the world of Jane Austen and started reading some of her other books and watching adaptations. I studied Sense and Sensibility and Northanger Abbey in college, and of course, I started hosting Janeaustenjuly. I love the way I came to Jane Austen with no spoilers for any of her books, and with a fresh and innocent perspective. But I know that isn't everyone's experience, and I know that a lot of Jane Austen's couples permeate pop culture. A lot of people know the famous couple in Pride and Prejudice in the same way that they know Romeo and Juliet die at the end of the play, without being that familiar with the original texts. It's just something you come to know from living in our society. Funny Shakespeare tangent about Romeo and Juliet. I was once at a performance of Romeo and Juliet where the 2 middle-aged ladies behind me gasped in utter surprise as the star-crossed lovers died. First of all, it's not a surprise. It's in the opening lines. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. But even if they weren't paying attention to the beginning of the play, how did they live to be in their 50s or 60s not knowing the basic plotline of Romeo and Juliet? Anyway, I thought that was surprising and hysterical, and I wanted to share it with you. Jane Austen might not be quite as prominent a figure in pop culture as Shakespeare, but I think that by a certain age, most people know the title of at least one of her books, and are probably familiar with the main couple in Pride and Prejudice, if not the basic plotline. So how do you navigate that when introducing someone to Jane Austen? Is it damaging to their experience to know something of the text ahead of time? For me, personally, there was a certain magic to discovering Austen's writing with very little prior knowledge, and no adaptation, be it on screen or in print, can compare to the original. I wouldn't have wanted it any other way, but I know plenty of people who first discovered their love of Austen's writing through the 1995 BBC miniseries of Pride and Prejudice, or the 2005 version with Keira Knightley, or through any number of other movie adaptations or abridged print versions, or even modernized retellings. Part of why Jane Austen is so amazing is that the adaptations of her work can be great, but they don't hold a candle to the originals. Austen's writing is delightfully sharp and witty, and while some of that comes through in adaptations, I think that to fully appreciate the complexity of her characters and the depth of her insight into the human condition, you have to refer to her original writing. I've been thinking a lot about this lately with the birth of my son. When will I introduce him to Austen, and in what capacity? He'll probably listen to me talk about Austen or show interest in an adaptation that I'm watching one day. He likely won't have a similar experience to me when reading her work at all. Anyway, everyone knows that I love Jane Austen, so I've been gifted a little selection of Jane Austen-themed board books for my son. They're kind of amazing. The first one is Lit for Little Hands, an adapted form of Pride and Prejudice. And my first reaction to it was that I loved it and appreciated the gift, but I wasn't sure if I ever wanted to read it to my son. I don't know if I want him to be introduced to Austen with this simplified version of Pride and Prejudice. It's well done in some ways. I love how the book covers Mr. Bennet's face here, illustrating how he's disconnected from aiding his daughters to find suitable matches in some respects. But it also downplays the severity and repercussions of Lizzie's interaction with Mr. Collins. And it completely ruins the surprise of Mr. Darcy's role in Lydia's plotline. I guess it glosses over some things that I missed or overlooked on my first reading of Pride and Prejudice. But still, do I want to introduce the story at this level, or is it best left until someone could appreciate the original? Or even until they can appreciate a different version, a more complex version. I've kind of decided that I don't want to read this book to my son, that there are better versions of Pride and Prejudice that I'd want him to be exposed to if I can't introduce him to the original first. And then I have 3 other Austen board books, which are BabyLit books, written by Jennifer Adams and illustrated by Alison Oliver. Heather from Fresh Parchment gifted them to me, and they're visually stunning. But what I really love about them is that they reflect aspects of Austen's work while staying age-appropriate and containing little to no information about the plots of Austen's novels. They basically contain references and Easter eggs for adults who like Austen, rather than trying to convey any sort of story to a child. I've actually read them all to my son already. Pride and Prejudice is a counting book. So you have 1 English village, 4 marriage proposals. There are spoilers here, but you don't have to dwell on the pairings, especially if your child can't read yet. You don't have to actually say the names of everyone who gets proposed to. And it culminates with £10,000 a year. Emma is an emotions primer, which is kind of perfect for the book Emma. And some of my favorites: I love that Mr. Elton is angry, Frank Churchill is amused, and I also like that Miss Taylor is happy. And then I love that Sense and Sensibility is a book all about opposites. It's really apt for the story. There's a page that names the couples, but they're on the cake in smaller font, so you don't really have to dwell on them. I think that James might like Sense and Sensibility best, but it's really hard to tell what a 3-month-old's preferences are. He just cried the least for this one so far. But anyway, I've been thinking about the best way to introduce readers, especially younger readers, but maybe not as young as my son, to Austen's work, to instill that magical love for Austen that I felt when I first picked up Pride and Prejudice. And I've come to a few conclusions. The first is that probably the biggest mistake to make, and a major impediment to loving Austen, would be to pick up her original work too early. It's one thing to gloss over some of the nuances of characterization, or read her books as love stories, or miss details that you'd only understand if you knew facts about Regency society. But if you pick up an Austen novel and don't have the reading comprehension to follow the basic plot, then you'll likely not finish the book or come away from the experience hating it. And then you run the risk of never giving Austen another chance, which would be devastatingly sad. So how early is too early then? I'd imagine it would vary based on your reading level and maturity. 12 or 13 seemed to have been a good age for me to discover Jane Austen, but would that be a good fit for everyone? I'm genuinely not sure. The second thing I realized is that even though I don't personally love the idea of discovering Austen through an abridged version or an adaptation, it could still lead to a lifelong love affair with Austen's work. I have to admit that I love the idea of a younger reader enjoying a modern adaptation that's inspired by Austen's books, but works well as a novel even if you know nothing of the original. Something like Pride by Ibi Zoboi, or Where the Rhythm Takes You. If you like one of those adaptations and then discover that it was based on something else and want to read the original, I think that that can be a really rewarding way to find Austen. The books are similar enough to draw parallels and connections, but you don't exactly know the plot of Pride and Prejudice after having read Pride by Ibi Zoboi. In some ways, you might develop a deeper understanding of Pride and Prejudice if you have those types of comparisons to rely on. I usually think of a good adaptation as something that is worthy of reading or watching in its own right, but also illuminates something about the original in a new and interesting way. It makes smart choices about where to deviate from the original or what to emphasize to enhance your understanding of the original or get you thinking about the original in a new way. The best adaptations make me want to reread what they're based on again. And I suppose a good adaptation can also make you want to read the original for the first time. And the third and final thing I've concluded is that perhaps we don't actually have much control over how a young reader experiences Austen for the first time, or Dickens, or Shakespeare, or any author or book for that matter. Maybe they'll gravitate towards Austen on their own in due time and love her work. Or maybe they'll be forced to read Pride and Prejudice in school and hate it. Or maybe it'll be required reading and they happen to love their English teacher that year and fall in love with Austen. Their experiences will be inherently different from ours, and that's okay. It's what makes us each unique as readers. So I would love to know in the comments section down below, when was your first experience with Austen's work and how did you fall in love with her writing? I just assume that you love Austen if you've made it to the end of this video, but if you are still listening and don't actually like Jane Austen, I'd love to hear your experiences with her as well. But whether you like Austen or not, in your opinion, what age is the best age to read Austen for the first time? How do you feel about reading abridged books or watching adaptations before reading the original? What is the best way to get young readers, or readers in general, interested in Austen's novels? And can you ever be too young for Jane Austen? Let's chat all things Austen in the comments down below. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you all in another video very soon. Bye!